Dog won't stop scratching at a stranger's backpack." What police found inside left everyone stunned. The usual buzz of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport echoed through Terminal A as Officer Sarah Collins adjusted the radio on her uniform beside her. Max maintained his characteristic alert posture, his amber eyes methodically scanning the crowd of passengers, moving like a human tide. It was 2:47 in the afternoon, and until then it had been just another routine day for the K9 unit duo. The first sign that something was wrong came when Max stopped abruptly, his ears perking up. In alert, Sarah knew every nuance of her partner's behavior, and that sudden change in his body language made her heart race through years of working together. She had learned to trust the Malinois instincts as if they were her own. Max's attention locked onto a man in his 40s, wearing a navy business suit, carrying a black backpack over his shoulder. The stranger moved with purpose through the terminal, but something about him had triggered Max's interest. Sarah watched as her partner's posture stiffened his nose. Working overtime, Max steady, she commanded softly, but the dog didn't respond a first in their 5 years together. Instead, he started moving deliberately toward the businessman, his body language shifting from alert to intense, tele-focused. The man noticed them approaching and quickened his pace slightly. Adjusting his grip on the backpack, Sarah's training kicked in and she began cataloging details. Approximately 511 well-groomed, expensive watch. No visible signs of nervousness, except a slight twitch in his left hand as he glanced at his boarding pass. So Sarah called out, her voice carrying the authority of her badge, "Could you please stop for a moment?" The stranger turned his face a mask of professional annoyance. "Is there a problem, officer? I have a flight to catch." Before Sarah could respond, Max let out a low growl. Not his usual alert signal, but something deeper, more urgent. The man took a half-step backward, his knuckles whitening around the backpack strap. "It's just a routine check, sir," Sarah said, maintaining her calm demeanor while her mind raced. In 5 years of service, Max had never disobeyed a direct command, never shown this level of fixation without cause, but making a scene in a busy airport terminal without probable cause could cost her her badge. The businessman glanced at his watch, then at the security checkpoint ahead. "Look, officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm going to miss my flight. I've got nothing in here but my laptop and some business papers." Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her around them. Other travelers were beginning to take notice, some slowing their pace to watch the scene unfold. She could already imagine her supervisor's voice. "Collins, we can't stop every passenger your dog takes an interest in." But Max wasn't backing down. His eyes remained locked on the backpack, his body tense with purpose. Sarah had learned to read her partner like a book, and everything in his posture screamed that this wasn't a false alarm. The man started to step away, his movements deliberately casual. If there's nothing else, Max's reaction was immediate and unprecedented. He moved forward, positioning himself directly in the stranger's path. His training, wearing with his instinct to act, Sarah saw something flicker across the man's face just for a moment, but long enough fear. "Sir, I'm going to need you to remain where you are," Sarah said, her hand moving to her radio around them. The terminals. Usual chaos seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the rising tension between officer dog and businessman. The stranger's face hardened, his eyes darting between Sarah, Max, and the nearest exit. Sarah recognized that look. It was the same one she'd seen countless times just before a suspect bolted, as if reading her thoughts. Max's muscles coiled. Ready, the game of cat and mouse was about to begin, and Sarah had to make a decision: trust her partner's instincts and risk her career, or let the man walk and risk something far worse. The businessman took another step back, and Max's growl deepened. In that moment, Sarah made her choice. Whatever was in that backpack, her partner was willing to risk their perfect record to stop it. Now she had to trust that Max, as always, knew something she didn't. "Central, this is Officer Collins," she spoke into her radio, eyes locked on the increasingly agitated stranger. "I'm going to need backup at Terminal A main concourse." The man's face changed in an instant, and Sarah knew whatever was in that backpack, it was worth running for, as if confirming her thoughts. He suddenly turned and bolted into the crowd, clutching his bag like his life depended on it. Max looked up at her, waiting for the command that would unleash 5 years of training. Sarah nodded, her decision made. "Go get him, boy." And with that, the chase was on, as Sarah sprinted after Max through the crowded terminal. Her mind flashed back to their first meeting at the Atlanta Police Department K-9 Training Center. It had been a crisp autumn morning, much like today, when Lieutenant Torres had introduced her to the young Belgian Malinois who would become her partner. "He's different, Collins," Torres had said, watching the lean shepherd-type dog sitting at perfect attention. Most handlers can't keep up with a Malinois. They've got twice the energy of a German shepherd and 3 times the attitude, but something tells me you two are going to be a perfect match. The memory blurred as Sarah ducked around a family with rolling suitcases, keeping her eyes locked on Max's tail, weaving through the crowd ahead. The businessman was good. He knew exactly how to use the terminal's chaos to his advantage. But Max was better. "Excuse me, police," Sarah called out, watching as travelers pressed themselves against the walls. Max hadn't lost the scent for a second, despite the overwhelming mix of perfumes, food court aromas, and the thousands of people passing through the airport. Another memory surfaced, their first successful track together. It had been a missing child case, and everyone said the trail was too cold. But Max had proved them wrong, following a scent through 3 miles of suburban Atlanta to find a terrified 8-year-old hiding in a storm drain. That was the day Sarah learned to trust Max's instincts without question. The businessman darted left, suddenly heading toward the emergency stairwell. Sarah's radio crackled to life. "Collins, what's your 20? We've got units converging on Terminal A. Suspect heading for emergency stairs near gate." "A15, she responded between breaths. "Male 40s, navy suit, black backpack." Max is in pursuit. The stairwell door slammed open as the suspect crashed through it. Max hit the door a second later, his claws clicking rapidly on the concrete steps as he bounded downward. Sarah followed, her boots echoing in the enclosed space stop, Atlanta Police. Her voice reverberated off the walls, but the man kept running. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he was in better shape than most of their runners. Another red flag 3 years ago, during their advanced certification training. The instructor had taught them about reading a suspect's behavior. Professional. Criminals move differently, he'd said. They practice their escapes. They know exactly what they're going to do before they do it. This guy was professional. Each move was calculated, even in flight. He wasn't just running from a random security check. He'd been prepared for this possibility. 2 flights down, the door to the tarmac level burst open. Sarah's radio exploded with chatter as ground crews reported the unauthorized access. Max never hesitated, shooting through the door. After their quarry, Sarah emerged into the service corridor to see the businessman sprinting toward the baggage handling area, his leather shoes slipping on the polished floor. "Max, hold," Sarah commanded as they approached the heavy machinery. The dog immediately pulled up, remembering his training around dangerous equipment. The suspect glanced back, surprise flickering across his face at the dog's discipline. That moment of distraction cost him. His foot caught on a luggage conveyor, sending him sprawling. The backpack flew from his grip, skidding across the floor. Max's reaction was instant. Instead of pursuing the fallen man, he zeroed in on the bag. his body language shifting from pursuit to alert. Sarah's blood ran cold in 5 years of narcotics and weapons detection. She'd never seen Max react quite like this. Whatever was in that bag was bad, really bad. Don't move, she ordered, drawing her weapon as the businessman started to push himself up. Hands where I can see them. He froze, then slowly raised his hands, his eyes fixed not on Sarah's gun but on the backpack. Now lying 10 feet away, Max stood guard over it, his posture rigid, emanating an intensity that Sarah had seen only once before during their chemical weapons detection training. The sound of running footsteps echoed down the corridor as backup arrived. Sarah kept her weapon trained on the suspect, but her mind was racing. Max had been right from the start, just like he'd been right about the little girl in the storm drain, just like he'd been right about the hidden weapons cache last year that earned him a commendation. But something about this felt different, bigger. As Officer Martinez cuffed the businessman, Sarah watched Max's unwavering focus on the backpack, and a chill ran down her spine. The real question wasn't why the man ran. The real question was what could be in that innocent-looking backpack that had triggered such an intense response in her partner, looking at Max's alert posture. Sarah had a feeling they were about to find out, and she wasn't sure they were ready for the answer. Time seemed to freeze in the baggage handling area as Sarah watched the bomb squad technicians approach the backpack. Max hadn't moved from his position, his eyes fixed on the target, even as other K-9 units arrived on scene. The businessman sat handcuffed nearby, his expensive suit now wrinkled and dirty, his face an expressionless mask. Collins Lieutenant Torres's voice cut through the tension. What the hell happened up there? Sarah turned to her supervisor, keeping one eye on the scene. Max alerted on the suspect's backpack, sir. When questioned, the subject fled through a secure area, and now we've got half the terminal shut down. Torres ran a hand over his face. This better be good. Collins, if that bag turns out to be full of gym clothes, a sharp command from the bomb squad leader cut him off. Everyone watched as they positioned their equipment around the backpack. Max finally backed away at Sarah's signal, but his body remained tense. Ready. Suddenly the businessman spoke, his voice eerily calm. You have no idea what you're dealing with before anyone could react. TWW twisted violently in the grip of the officers, holding him in one fluid motion. He broke free and sprinted toward an emergency exit. Max moved to pursue, but Sarah held him back. Something wasn't right about this. The suspect slammed through the door into a maintenance tunnel. 2 officers took off after him, but Sarah's attention was drawn to something else, a small device that had fallen from his sleeve during the struggle. Everyone down, she shouted, recognizing it as a remote trigger. The next few seconds were chaos. Officers dove for cover as the device skittered across the floor. Max lunged forward, snatching it in his teeth and racing toward a nearby industrial waste bin. He dropped it inside, just as a muffled pop echoed through the area. When the smoke cleared, Sarah realized with horror what had happened. The diversion had worked. The backpack was gone, snatched in the confusion by someone else. Their suspect had help. Max, track, she commanded, and they were running again, following a new scent. Through the maze of service corridors behind them, she could hear Torres shouting orders, mobilizing every available unit. They emerged onto the tarmac between 2 massive cargo planes. Max LED'd them to a service vehicle garage where fresh tire marks indicated a hasty departure. Sarah's radio crackled with reports of a maintenance van breaking through a security checkpoint. He never intended to get that bag through security. She realized aloud this was a handoff from the start. Max barked sharply, picking up a new trail. They raced through the garage toward another set of tunnels, these leading toward the international terminal. Sarah's mind raced. If they were trying to get whatever was in that bag onto an international flight. They burst into the international departures area. Max weaving through the startled crowd with precision. Sarah caught glimpses of another figure ahead, carrying the black backpack and wearing maintenance coveralls. "Stop, police!" she shouted, but her voice was lost in the terminal noise. The second suspect reached the security checkpoint, flashing what looked like employee credentials, but Max's reaction told Sarah everything she needed to know. This was their target. As they closed the distance, Sarah caught a glimpse inside the partially open bag. Her heart nearly stopped nestled among ordinary travel items. She saw something that changed everything, and suddenly understood why Max had been so adamant from the start. This wasn't just about smuggling or drugs, this was something far worse, and they were running out of time to stop it. Max's pace quickened, sensing her urgency. He ran toward the customs area where armed officers were already responding to the alert. Sarah touched her radio, all unit suspect heading toward international customs. Be advised, package is priority 1, I repeat, priority 1. Max's training had led them here, his instincts cutting through every deception and false lead. Now, as they closed in on their target, Sarah silently thanked whoever had partnered her with this extraordinary dog, because in the next few minutes she had feeling they were going to need every bit of that training to prevent a disaster. The chase was about to end one way or another. The international terminal erupted into chaos as the suspect in maintenance coveralls vaulted over a luggage cart, sending bags crashing to the floor. Sarah watched in horror as he pulled something from his pocket, a small aerosol can that made her blood run cold. "Everyone back," she shouted, her training kicking in. "Clear the air area." Max tracked the suspect's every move, but maintained his distance exactly as he'd been trained for chemical threats around them. Travelers scattered, creating a buffer zone between the fugitive and the growing circle of responding officers. Sarah's radio crackled. Collins' TSA confirms the first suspect's credentials were high-level fakes. CIA is involved now. Whatever's in that bag, I know what it is. Sarah cut in her eyes, fixed on the backpack. And if I'm right, we've got about 10 minutes before this goes from bad to catastrophic. The suspect backed toward the windows overlooking the tarmac, holding the aerosol can out like a shield. "Stay back," he shouted, his accent distinctly. "Eastern European, one step closer, and I release it." Sarah's mind raced back to their chemical weapons training. Max had excelled at detecting trace amounts of deadly substances, but this was different. This was active threat containment, and one wrong move could expose hundreds of people. "Sir, you need to think about what you're doing," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. "This terminal is already locked down. There's nowhere to go." A thin smile crossed the man's face. "You think this is about escape?" He nodded toward the massive windows. "Look outside. Count the planes. Calculate the wind patterns. One small release." Here, Sarah felt her stomach drop as she understood the airport's ventilation system, the atmospheric conditions. They weren't trying to smuggle something out. They were planning to use the airport itself as a delivery system. Max edged forward slightly, his training wearing with his protective instincts. Sarah could read his body language perfectly. He could take down the suspect before the aerosol deployed, but the timing would have to be perfect. Officer Collins, a new voice, as a tall woman in a dark suit approached, showing CIA credentials. "We need that bag intact, whatever you're thinking." "I trust my partner," Sarah interrupted, never taking her eyes off the suspect. Years of working with Max had taught her to read the slightest changes in his posture. He was telling her something now, something crucial. The suspect's eyes darted between the officers, the windows, and the growing crowd of agency personnel arriving on scene. His finger tightened on the aerosol. Trigger time slowed down. Sarah saw Max's muscles tense a fraction of a second before the suspect moved. As the man's arms started to rise, she gave the command they'd practiced countless times, but hoped never to use Max Sentinel protocol. What happened next was a blur of precise movement. Max launched forward, but instead of going for the suspect, he twisted in mid-air, catching the aerosol can as it fell from the man's startled grip. In the same motion, tackled the suspect, driving him away from the backpack. The CIA agent rushed forward with a containment unit securing the aerosol can. As Max held it carefully in his trained grip, other officers swarmed in, securing the suspect and the backpack. Later in the debriefing, Sarah would learn the full scope of what they'd stopped: the sophisticated plot, the potential casualties, the international implications. But in that moment, all she could focus on was Max, standing proud beside her, his training and instincts having prevented a disaster. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears as the CIA began their cleanup. "You knew from the start, didn't you?" Max looked up at her with those intelligent eyes, and Sarah was reminded once again why K-9 officers put so much faith in their partners. Sometimes instinct wasn't just about training or experience. Sometimes it was about trust, and that trust had just saved countless lives. The CIA's mobile command center had transformed a corner of the airport security wing into a high-tech operations base. Screens displayed chemical analysis, readouts, satellite imagery, and surveillance feeds from across the terminal. Sarah stood before a panel of senior officials, Max at her side, as they pieced together the magnitude of what they prevented. The aerosol contained a weaponized nerve. Agent explained, pointing to a molecular diagram. Combined. Thousands. Sarah felt Max shift closer to her leg, sensing her tension on the main screen. Footage showed their first encounter with the businessman, now identified as Victor Petro, a known operative with ties to international terror cells. "What we don't understand," Carter continued, "is how your dog detected it. The container was triple sealed, specifically designed to prevent detection." Sarah looked down at Max, remembering every training session, every drill, every moment that had led to this. Max wasn't detecting the chemical. She realized he was reading the suspect's micro expressions, his body language. "We've worked hundreds of cases together. He knows when something's wrong, even if he can't smell it." A commotion outside interrupted them through the glass walls. Sarah saw officers rushing toward the holding cells. Her radio crackled to life. "Prisoner escape in progress. Petro is loose. Stay here," Carter ordered, but Sarah was already moving. Max right beside her. They emerged into a corridor filled with smoke, a diversion from what had to be an inside man. Max LED her through the haze, tracking not just scent, but sound and movement. They found two uncons IOU's guards near a broken security door. "Central, we need medical at security level B." Sarah radioed, checking the guards' pulses. "Suspect is heading for the maintenance tunnels." Max's bark echoed through the corridor. He'd found the trail. They raced through the underground network of tunnels, the sound of their pursuit bouncing off concrete walls ahead. They could hear footsteps and the clang of metal doors. They emerged into a vast mechanical room filled with the airport's primary ventilation systems. Sarah's training kicked in. This was the heart of what their suspects had been targeting. If Petro had a backup plan, I wondered if it would be you. Petro's voice echoed through the chamber. He stepped out from behind a massive air handler holding something in his hand. "You and that remarkable dog, Max," growled low, but held his position. Sarah drew her weapon. "It's over. Petro, the CIA has your contacts, your network. There's nowhere left to run." He laughed. "Officer Collins, you still don't understand. This was never about escape." He held up a small device. "This was about sending a message. Sometimes the backup plan is just as effective as the original." Sarah saw Max's muscles coil, ready to launch. She remembered their years of training together, all the silent communications, the trust they'd built without a word. She knew what he was about to do. "Max," she whispered, "take him." What happened next was a testament to thousands of hours of training. Max launched forward as Petro raised the device. Sarah moved left, drawing his attention. The dog fainted, right then cut left. A move they'd perfected in training. Petro fell for it, turning to block the attack he expected. Instead, Max went low, catching his wrist with precisely calculated force. The device clattered to the ground as Sarah moved in, securing the suspect within moments. The room filled with tactical teams and CIA agents. How Petro asked, as they led him away, that container was supposed to be undetectable. Sarah knelt beside Max, ruffling his fur. Because there's something you can't hide from a dog like him: intent. And Max has always known the difference between right and wrong. As the CIA secured the scene, Sarah looked at her partner, the dog, who trusted his instincts enough to risk everything. In the end, it hadn't been about superior technology or intelligence networks. It had been about the unshakable bond between a handler and her canine, and the truth that sometimes the greatest weapons against evil are loyalty, trust, and the unwavering instinct to protect. 2 weeks after the incident at Hartsfield-Jackson, Sarah Collins stood at attention in the Atlanta Police Department's main auditorium. Max sat perfectly still beside her, his coat gleaming under the lights, the only sign of his excitement being the slight twitch of his tail. The room was packed with fellow officers, government officials, and media representatives, a far cry from their usual quiet morning. Briefings for extraordinary service above and beyond the call of duty. Chief Richardson announced, his voice carrying through the hushed auditorium. Officer Sarah Collins and K-9 Officer Max are hereby awarded the Medal of Valor. Their actions on September 15th prevented what could have been one of the most devastating terrorist attacks on American soil since 9/11. As the chief draped the medals over both their necks, Max's attached to a special collar, Sarah's mind wandered back to the aftermath of that fateful day. The CIA had uncovered a vast network of operatives preventing similar attacks planned for airports across the country. The investigation had revealed cells in 12 major cities, each poised to strike, but none of that would have been possible without Max's initial alert. In Terminal A, Agent Carter, standing in the front row, caught her eye and nodded slightly. The CIA had been surprisingly forthcoming with information after the incident, sharing details about the broader impact of their intervention. The chemical agent they'd intercepted had been part of a new class of weapons specifically designed to bypass traditional detection methods. Max's ability to read human behavior had unknowingly exposed a vulnerability in their enemy's perfect plan. The ceremony concluded with thunderous applause, but Sarah's attention was drawn to Max, who maintained his disciplined pose despite the excitement around them. In an hour, they'd be back on patrol, walking those same terminal corridor where it all began, because that's what silent heroes do. They keep working, keep protecting, ready for the next time they're needed. Officer Collins, a small voice, caught her attention as they left the auditorium. A young girl, maybe 7 years old, stood clutching her mother's hand. Her eyes were fixed on Max with a mixture of awe and admiration. "I pet Max." Sarah looked at her partner, who had already softened his posture, transforming from the alert K-9 officer to the gentle soul she knew him to be. It amazed her how he could switch between these roles so effortlessly, from the fierce protector who had taken down Petro to the friendly dog who knew exactly how to approach children. "Of course," she smiled. Max say hello as the girl gently stroked his fur. Her mother spoke softly. "We were there that day in the terminal. We didn't know what was happening, but we saw you two running past. Asked my daughter, said she wasn't scared because she could tell Max was protecting everyone." We later found out how close her voice trailed off, emotion catching in her throat. Sarah felt her own eyes welling up. That's exactly what he does. She managed every single day. The interaction stayed with her as they prepared for their afternoon patrol. In the K9 unit's locker room, Sarah carefully checked Max's equipment, his tactical vest, his specialized collar. The gear they hoped they'd never need to use again. Lieutenant Torres stopped by as they were getting ready. "Collins," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "CIA finally cleared us to know the casualty projections. If that device had gone off," he paused, his usual gruff demeanor softening. "You and Max, you saved a lot of lives that day, more than we'll ever be able to tell the public." Sarah nodded, unable to find the right words. Max pressed against her leg, sensing her emotion. That was the thing about their partnership. Words weren't always necessary. Later that afternoon, Sarah and Max resumed their patrol of Terminal A. The daily rush of travelers flowed around them, business people hurrying to meetings, families heading on vacation, airport, staff going about their routines. None of them knew the full story of what had almost happened here, and that was exactly how it should be. Max walked confidently beside her, his eyes scanning the crowd with the same dedication he'd shown since their first day together. Sarah noticed how other officers nodded respectfully as they passed, how TSA agents smiled at the sight of them. Their story had spread through the law enforcement community, becoming a testament to the bond between handler and K9. As they approached the spot where Max had first alerted on Petro, Sarah paused. Max looked up at her, his amber eyes full of understanding. She knelt down, pretending to adjust his tactical vest, while actually just taking a moment with her partner. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Right from the start, you knew what was at stake." Max pressed his head against her hand, his way of saying, "I'll always have your back in that moment." Sarah thought about all the training, all the long hours, all the times they'd pushed each other to be better. It hadn't just been about developing skills. It had been about building an unshakable trust. A passing family caught her attention, a father pointing out Max to his young son, explaining how police dogs help keep everyone safe. Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams of becoming a K9 officer. Now here she was living that dream with the best partner she could have asked for, standing up. Sarah straightened her uniform and they continued their patrol. To the casual observer, they were just another K9 unit doing their job, but to those who knew, they were a reminder of something profound, that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism come not from dramatic speeches or grand gestures, but from the silent trust between partners who are willing to risk everything to protect others. As the afternoon sun streamed through the terminal's massive windows, casting long shadows across the busy concourse, Sarah and Max walked their familiar route, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Because that's what partners do. They face the unknown together, one step at a time, trusting each other's instincts until the very end. And in the end, that trust makes all the difference.